You know what? Spain once really had the whole world in the palm of its hand. Today, everyone talks about the British Empire. But in the 1500s, the real powerhouse was Spain, an empire stretching from Europe to Africa, from the Americas to Asia. It was so huge that people started saying, or the sun never sets on this empire. Later, the English stole the phrase, but the first ones to say it were the Spaniards. But here's the interesting part. Spain had so much loot that it eventually collapsed because of that very loot. They thought gold and silver were real wealth. Sounds familiar, right? Sudden money doesn't usually lift people up. Most of the time it crushes them. When they stepped into the New World after 1492, it was like they'd found an endless treasure. They conquered Mexico, took Peru. There's a place called Potosi, an enormous mountain of silver. So enormous that people called it the mountain that eats men. For a whole century, silver from there was shipped to Europe. Just think about it. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain brought in 180,000 tons of silver, more than Europe had extracted in the previous 1,000 years. This silver changed Europe, and the world too. Ships leaving Sevilla and Cadiz sailed to the Mediterranean, to the Netherlands, even across the Pacific to Manila. Chinese silk, porcelain. The first real global trade network began here, and Spain sat right at its center. Here's a striking comparison. When the English founded Jamestown in 1607, basically a swamp, Mexico City already had universities, printing presses, and cathedrals. Lima was a massive city, and the first permanent European settlement in today's U.S., St. Augustine, was founded by the Spanish in 1565, 40 years before the English showed up. So yeah, Spain started the game way ahead. But that's where the problem begins. Spain had treasure, but no real wealth, because they misused the silver. Prices in the country skyrocketed. Within a century, prices quadrupled. The reason is simple. Money increased, but bread, fabric, labor didn't. When more money entered the town, the baker said, "Then I'll raise the price of bread." The result? Money lost its value, and the worst part, the more silver came in, the poorer people felt, because wages stayed the same, but prices exploded. And Spain also spent the money on consumption instead of production. Italians, Dutch, Germans. They all got rich by selling goods to Spain. Spain didn't develop itself. Why bother? The ships are coming anyway, they thought. And then there were the wars. Spanish kings saw themselves as the protectors of Catholicism, so they poured their treasure into war. Wars against the Ottomans, the Dutch Revolt, the French Wars of Religion, the 30 Years' War, and of course the famous Spanish Armada. Building that fleet cost a fortune, and when it collapsed, it caused a financial earthquake. But here's the real kicker. Spain didn't just spend the treasure that arrived. They borrowed against treasure that hadn't even arrived yet. They thought, silver from Potosi is coming anyway. But when a ship sank, was delayed, or got taken by pirates, bankruptcy. And yes, they went bankrupt. 1,557, 1,575, 1,596, 1,607. Even the biggest and richest empire in the world ended up saying, "We can't pay." Then the pirates hit the stage. But these weren't your typical pirates. They were state-backed economic weapons. Francis Drake, Piet Hein. When they seized Spanish fleets, they weren't just stealing gold. They were crashing Spain's credit system. In 1628, Piet Hein captured an entire treasure fleet in one shot. Spain's economy collapsed again. The English and the Dutch used the silver they stole to build banks, expand navies, open trading companies. Spain, meanwhile, was basically feeding its own lifeblood to its enemies. By the 1600s, Spain still looked huge on the map, but it was hollow inside. Inflation, debt, wars, pirate attacks. People grew poorer, day by day. The empire had glory, but no durability. And its enemies saw this clearly. Spain had built a loot-based model. The English and Dutch built systems instead. Banking, companies, production, colonies that created lasting value. The result is obvious: a treasure runs out, systems don't. That's why England and the Netherlands rose while Spain declined. And here's the familiar lesson. Money flow is not wealth. Any society that only consumes and doesn't produce ends up with the same fate. History may not repeat itself, but it definitely has a rhythm. Spain's story today feels like a warning. If you inflate your economy with money but don't strengthen its foundation, the collapse is waiting right at the door.